Hello, croeso. My name is Dr. Huw Griffiths, and this is another one of my presentations as regards some of my ideas on what we should be teaching, beginning to teach for the new curriculum here in Wales then. I'd like to look predominantly at one of my presentations which looks at stories. In my opinion, this is an amazing opportunity we have here in Wales then to develop stories within our classrooms. I'd like to begin by looking at this photo. Poised on the edge of a cliff, clutching a harp, the last surviving bard places a curse on the English invaders before leaping to its death. This dramatic painting has become almost an icon here in Wales. It's based on Thomas Gray's poem, The Bard. It recounts the tale of Edward I's legendary massacre of the Welsh bards. It is painted way back in 1774 by the artist Thomas Jones and is on display at the National Museum of Wales in Cardiff. Bards played a vitally important part of society in medieval Wales then, writing poems of praise for the Welsh kings and princes, and it's very often as historians, this is how we understand Welsh society during this period. But of course, being Welsh, we're not simply happy with having only bards and poets. We also wanted storytellers, and we have those in Welsh courts, and they were known as the cyfarwydd. And as a historian, I would love to spend the rest of the presentation discussing this with you, the role of the cyfarwydd, the storyteller within Welsh society, and the bards and the poets themselves. Very often they produced, for example, the Mabinogion. As I've already mentioned in a previous presentation, other countries, and I'm looking across the border here towards England, haven't got their mythology. And as a result, they need to look towards the classics, towards other countries, be that Greek mythology or Roman mythology. Fortunately, here in Wales, we have our own mythology. And it's a world famous mythology, the Mabinogion. And it is very important that we celebrate our incredible culture, heritage and stories to our learners in every school throughout Wales. I feel passionately about this then. Equally, or even more passionate, you can see the words of the actor Luke Evans in this presentation.
Deep in the soul of epic, a million legends lie, awake and reimagined by people passing by. Arthur, Glyndŵr, Llywelyn, heroes of wild Wales, epic legends living in storytellers' tales. Branwen and Blodeuwedd, Merlin's magic might, Llynvan's great beauty, Rhiannon's birds in flight. You become the legend and teller of the tales when you find your epic deep in the soul of Wales.
Wow, follow that. But the curriculum of Wales gives us all as educators an opportunity to find our epic. We need to adopt a new mindset on education because we are moving away from a content-led curriculum towards a purpose-led curriculum. When our young people leave our schools at 16, we want them to be ambitious, capable learners, enterprising, creative contributors, ethically informed citizens, healthy, confident individuals. In fact, the Curriculum for Wales gives us an opportunity to write a new story for our learners here in Wales. I can't overemphasize this idea. As teachers in Wales, you have the freedom to develop your curriculum for your learners. And what I try to do in these presentations is to argue the case for placing storytelling as one of the central pillars in Welsh education. As I previously mentioned, we were very fortunate in Wales that the curriculum itself is actually written by teachers, the first curriculum in the world. But we were also assisted by academics, and one of those was Professor Louise Hayward from Glasgow University. These are her words about the curriculum. Curriculum for Wales opens up spaces for teachers to be creative and to develop their own understanding of their work with their children in their own school and to ensure that the curriculum matches their own community. It is a liberating experience both for teachers and learners to co-construct what learners in Wales, what we need here in Wales. But if we look even broader outwards at the world and listen to the words of the Dalai Lama, he argues the planet does not need more successful people. The planet desperately needs peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kind. He goes beyond maybe not only storytellers, and it gives me great pride in the fact that here in Wales we've chosen health and well-being as an AOLE within the 6 AOLEs, the areas of learning for our young people. Wow, the world is truly watching us here in Wales, I believe. So what are the power of stories, and how powerful are they in fact? I'd like to introduce you here to Sir John Hegarty, a businessman, a PR executive. He's been described as an advertising guru responsible for, and if you could remember these, unfortunately I'm old enough to remember these, the Bisto advert, the Levi's advert, the Boddington's advert. He worked in setting up Saatchi and created his own business. And this is what he says about the power of stories. Storytelling is the most powerful form of communication ever invented. Through stories, we learn to entertain, communicate, socialize with each other. It's the most powerful form of communication. Shouldn't we be teaching this in our schools? Equally, Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers who has ever lived, and the first, you could argue, the first genuine scientist in history. In his ideas as regards the 3 keys of persuasion, how do we persuade people? He argues that there are pathos, emotion and stories, logos, logic and analytical, and ethos, evidence and credibility. And out of all these, he argues, for over 2,000 years, academics, including Aristotle, have made the decision that logos, logic-based on evidence, facts, reasons, is the most important. This was a pillar of knowledge, and the world was too scared to challenge this belief, and it's remained for over 2,000 years. I today argue that he was wrong. I say yes. Challenge his ideas. I believe that pathos, emotion, stories is the most important. And as I go on in this presentation, I'll explain why I think he's wrong. Having recently read the work of people like Rutger Bregman and Yuval Noah Harari, one thing that strikes me is that we human beings are really, really a strange lot, and nothing draws us in and closer together than stories. And I'd really encourage you to read their work. Over the last 20 to 30 years, a new science called neuroscience has developed to prove that Aristotle was wrong. I'll explain this in greater detail later, but a lot of the work has been done by this man, Professor Walter Fisher, and this is what he argues. Effective persuasion relies on telling a good story and being passionate about it. If we can put our ideas into narrative form, it helps your audience understand the world better, giving them a common sense of reference. So it's not only important for persuasion, it's vitally important for creativity. As argued by this man, David Trott, who says, why is storytelling so important to creativity? Well, it's what we build our ideas around. It's the very fabric of our thoughts. If the idea is the foundation of the creative process, then the story is the vehicle that delivers it, making it memorable and provocative. Vitally important to creativity. By the way, if you're listening to me now, I hope you've got a pen or a pencil and you write down the name David Trott. David Trott is a remarkable person as regards creativity. I'd really encourage you to put it into Google and look at davidtrott.co.uk and Google it later. His website, he has over hundreds and hundreds of really truly inspiring true stories as regards creativity. Vitally important resource for you if you want to develop the idea of storytelling. But I'd like to introduce you to 2 of the most creative people I've ever met in my life. The first one is David Peterson, the blacksmith, the world-renowned sculptor, the television presenter, the cultural commentator. I really could just simply go on then. But to me, he's an amazing storyteller. If you ever have an opportunity to meet David or be in his presence, you can't stop but listen to his stories. Arguably one of his most famous sculptors is the dragon at Mametz Wood, where the Battle of Mametz Wood took place, and hundreds and hundreds of Welsh soldiers were killed during the First World War then. It's become an icon to a certain extent. And he tells the story. And when you listen to that story, he talks about when he started creating the sculptor. Fortunately, some of the First World War soldiers were still alive, and he listened to their stories. But listening to David tell those stories, he brings the dragon alive, and you can see how really, really strong those ideas are. They truly come out. Another amazing storyteller who unfortunately is no longer with us is the artist Ozzy Osmond. And listening to him talking about his paintings and the stories behind them was a truly remarkable experience for me. Similar to David Peterson, the stories brought the work alive, truly brought the work alive. In the previous presentation, I described another storyteller, Meredith Evans, how he had a similar impact upon myself then. Hopefully, I've sort of gone about outlining the power of stories and shown how they're an intrinsic part of who we are as a people, a Cymry, and it's vitally important to us. But I also promised that I prove to you its importance and why, in my opinion, it should become one of the central pillars of the curriculum in your school, for your learners and for your community. One of the ideas is, what do you think about the brain? I question you then. If I was with you, unfortunately, by just doing it over the screen, I would love to actually be with you then and set you this as a task and for you to understand what we understand as regards the brain. These are some of the points. I'm not going to read over them all, but they're remarkable points about the brain. The human brain will triple its size the first year of life. The blood vessels that are present in the brain are almost 100,000 miles in length. And everything else, we've got a remarkable brain and everything that goes with that then. But I was wondering, are you aware that teachers are brain changers? I'd like to thank a former colleague of mine, Jenna Gravel, for opening my eyes to neuroplasticity and neuroscience. And the following 4 slides are, created by her then, and immediately, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I suppose. I'd like to thank her for these then. Neuroplasticity explains how the human brain is able to adapt, master new skills, store memories and information. Put simply, it explains how we learn. And very often, after listening to the presentation, I said, well, why didn't I know that? Well, when I was in university 20, 30 years ago, maybe, a lot of this information was not known, but we should know it as educators here. There are 3 facets, there are 3 steps towards neuroplasticity. First is brain building. It's highly dependent on childhood experiences like play, socialization, hearing stories read aloud. It involves creating new synaptic and fiber tract connections. In the image, if we look at the bottom right-hand side then, in the image, we can see that at birth, the connections are very few and sparse. However, by the age of 6, they have become greater in number and connections. They're far, far more in the pink then. Between the ages of 6 and 14, these connections decrease in number due to the next stage of the process, but become stronger if you look at them. The next step is step 2 then is pruning. Is another process involved in setting up the brain. Our efficient brains depend on eliminating connections that are not relevant or useful. Ineffective or weak connections are pruned in much the same way as a gardener would prune a tree or a bush, giving the plant its desired shape. And the final step, the third step then, is consolidation, is the third process occurring during early brain development, which helps us respond to things automatically without thinking. When the pathways and connections are used, often and consequently become stronger, responses become almost automatic. And that's the reason why I put the car in there. If you think back when you started driving, we had to concentrate on every single action. By now, of course, if you've driven long enough, it becomes almost automatic, and we don't actually think about a lot of our driving. We do them automatic. Not being a scientist, I decided to include this short video that explains it far, far clearer probably than myself then.
Neuroscience is a biological science that is concerned with the function of the brain and the nervous system. For many years, scientists thought that the brain was fixed and couldn't adapt or change after childhood. But advances in fMRI scanning have shown that this could not be further from the truth. We can now see that our brains change and adapt every day, regardless of our age. Every time we learn something new, we're harnessing the power of neuroplasticity. Neuroscientists believe we have over 100 billion neurons in our brain, each capable of connecting to tens of thousands of others. Neurons are the building blocks of the brain, and each one can make trillions of connections every second. When we learn a new skill or think about something differently, we begin to make new connections between neurons. Every time we practice a new skill, think in a certain way, or feel a specific emotion, those related connections are then strengthened, and it becomes easier for our brains to follow this pathway. If we keep using this pathway, our brains begin to adapt, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The less we use our old pathways, the weaker that pathway becomes. It's this ability to make new connections that has enabled scientists to coin the term neuroplasticity, meaning our brains are pliable and plastic and can grow, adapt, and change. When we apply the neuroscience of learning with how the brain works, we can modify 4 variables to maximize the retainment of knowledge. These can be summarized as AGES: attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. Attention. For us to be able to learn something, we need to pay attention to it. If we can't minimize distractions, then we can't focus on the learning and we won't remember it. Generation. This is where we encourage the learner to generate meaningful connections and associations with what they already know or a skill they already have. Help the learner to make those connections to previous learning and the wider context, and this includes the learner reflecting on their own learning process. Emotion. If we can attach emotion to the learning and help to motivate the learner with the rewards that they're going to gain from it, or challenge them to get out of their comfort zone, they're much more likely to remember the information later on. Spacing. Spacing out the learning over time and using repetition and retrieval instead of chunking it into one big block will strengthen the learning and help to move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. With the trend for more courses moving towards endpoint assessment, this skill will be key in the achievement and success of our learners.
So as you can see, neuroscience, the new science, this is another new field that's vitally important that we as educators here in Wales understand. As I previously mentioned in another presentation then, the importance of the OECD. This is a report they produced in 2019. One of the most powerful ways of brain changing is through storytelling, because it sets off chemicals in the brains. Similar to neuroscience, this is another new field of science that has developed over the last 20 years. And I'd like to focus on this today and give you an insight into how chemicals in the brain are triggered by storytelling. And I want you to experience some of these chemicals. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to drink any alcohol or do anything else. I simply want to tell you some stories, and I want to trigger off some of these chemicals. Okay, I used to think comfortably, hopefully you're relaxed and you sat back. I'm going to tell you 3 specific stories because we want you to meet your happy chemicals: dopamine, endorphin, and oxytocin. So hopefully, if I'm very good at telling stories, I would be able to set some of these off them. So the first one is dopamine. So you can close your eyes, you can just concentrate on the story maybe. So I'll start the story then. It's a fictitious story. Opening the door totally changed my life, for myself, for my family. It meant that nothing could go back to the way it had been. It certainly changed me as a person and would never return to the person who I'd once been. Everything, of course, began 2 hours before I ended up in the corridor, in the long, dark corridor, and in front of the dark door. I reached out and touched the handle. Everything was quiet but for the low hum of the outside traffic. Once I held the handle of the door, a loud, piercing, agonizing shriek could be heard from inside the room. I quickly looked out of the window, and to the left, I could clearly see. If I don't go on there and explain to you what I saw and what happened, it's really, really annoying, isn't it? I just wanted to show you what it felt like to build up high levels of dopamine. And if I didn't succeed, I'm very, very sorry, in your mind, by creating different scenarios. You were creating different scenarios in your head, trying to imagine what I was saying. I was trying to build up suspense and cliffhangers. Agatha Christie really does it far, far better than myself then in her novels then, can really build up dopamine. This is what dopamine actually looks like chemically then. It just makes me look quite intelligent for putting that up, I suppose. But what does it do then? When you have it in your blood, it makes you more focused, more motivated, and builds up memory. So if you build up dopamine within you. The next one then is oxytocin. And I'm very nervous about telling you the story then, because it's actually a true story. It's my story, and it's not a fictitious story as the previous one. I'm a big one of my favorite poems has been written by Dylan Thomas then, and he writes, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." It was written by Dylan Thomas when his father was passing away, and he didn't want him to go. He was talking to his father in the poem. Then he was asking his father to rage, rage. No, I don't want you to go. I want you to stay against the dying of the light. He didn't want his father to pass away. Last year was a very difficult year for myself and my family then, where I lost my father and my father-in-law. My father then was in a nursing home during COVID, and unfortunately I hadn't seen him for a few months because we couldn't go into the nursing home. We saw him through windows, but as the time wore on, he was going well. The last week of his life then, we were very fortunate that the nursing home could see the way things were going and allowed both myself and my brother to enter into his room. We were all fully kitted in gloves and mask and an apron and everything then. And we could see how things were going throughout that week then. He was getting weaker and weaker. You could see his nails were going black and his fingers were going black and his teeth were rotting in front of us. One of those visits then, as I said, I was very fortunate that both me and my brother were in all those visits. But when I went on my own, because he went in the morning and I went in the afternoon. And in the afternoon then, I hadn't taken the mask up, but it was only me there. And I simply wanted to give my father a kiss. And I turned to my father and I get emotional. I'm sorry. I said, "Dad, I'm sitting in." But I didn't want to say rage, rage against the dying of the light. I wanted my father to pass away. I didn't want him to fight anymore. He'd really struggled. He passed away the following day then. So it was a very, very difficult period in my life then. Talking about it, I suppose, makes it easier, and time is the healer. Okay, to come back then, hopefully I've now released in your brain some oxytocin. Stories often make us feel empathetic towards the characters and we bond with them. This is the chemical, the oxytocin, looks far, far more complicated than the previous one then. When we have it in our blood, it makes us more empathetic, more generous, more trusting and bonding towards others. It makes us feel human. It's what makes us feel human. That's what's the best description of oxytocin then. Okay, I want to wipe things clear now. I want to go back now and wipe away the negative feelings, because I want to set off endorphins. Endorphins then are the very positive vibes, I suppose, the positive chemicals. And I want to do this by saying a joke, maybe one of my favorite jokes. And the joke itself, and the reason I'm saying this joke is because it connects with the previous one to a certain extent, but a totally different way of relating the story then. Where once again, a father passes away and he's on his deathbed in the hospital then, and his two sons and daughter and wife and the doctor are there then, and they gather around the bed then. And the father said, "Well, it's lovely to see you all here then near the end. Blodwen, where are you? Blod, come here." And she comes close and she said, okay, I'm here, Dad. Okay, Blod, I'll give you the house in Jubilee Terrace and all the houses in Jubilee Terrace. Oh, wow. Thank you, Dad. Hi, David, where are you? I'm here, Dad. I'll give you all the offices in the centre of town. Oh, wow, thank you, Dad. William, my second son, where are you? Yes, Dad, I'm here, he said. I'll give you the houses in Station Road. Oh, thank you, Dad. And finally, just before he passes away, he turns and he said, Olga, my dear wife, where are you? I'm here. I'll give you the house and the houses on our street. Oh, thank you. He then quietly passed away. And the doctor turns to the wife, Olga, and he says, I never knew your husband was so rich. And Olga said, rich? What do you mean rich? He was a window cleaner. Okay, it's a very poor joke. But it hopefully set off some endorphins. And endorphins then, when we have it in your blood, it makes you feel happy, positive, and makes you laugh. I hopefully tried to make you laugh, and I'm very sorry if I didn't. But we've also got sad chemicals, and I want you to meet those sad chemicals. I'm not going to tell you the stories. The first one is cortisol. And you see these in stories in films such as Lassie, Dead Poets Society, Kramer versus Kramer, very, very powerful stories that have an impact, but they set off cortisol in memory. When you have it in your blood, it makes you feel stressed, depressed. Certainly, if you watched Kramer versus Kramer or Lassie or anything similar, you're blubbering by the end, obviously. And finally, then, adrenaline. Storytelling can also set adrenaline. Think of watching a horror film and the impact that has upon you then. This is what adrenaline looks like then. When you have it in your blood, it makes you feel anxious, nervous, pure excitement. So those are what storytelling can set off in our brains then. Equally then, there's a lot about neuroscience, the idea that there is a right side and a left side of the brain. Well, this unfortunately is pure and simply a myth. Although we obviously do have different personalities and talent, there's no reason to believe that there's differences can be explained by a dominance of one side of the brain to the other. And you see a lot of this then, but it's not based on fact. It's simply, unfortunately, a story. Finally then, the power of storytelling. Put simply, what is the power of stories? And this is sort of encapsulates everything, in my opinion. It gives us an opportunity to learn from another person's experience, and it can shape, strengthen, and challenge our opinions and values. When a story catches our attention and engages us, we are more likely to absorb the message and meaning within it than if the same message was presented simply as facts and figures. These words were said by arguably one of the greatest storytellers of our generation, J.K. Rowling. So I'd like you to, if I was with you, I'd love to discuss some of these thoughts with you. It's not up to me to stuff these ideas down your throats, because I emphasize with the new curriculum, it's down to you to begin this conversation, to create your curriculum for your learners. What do you think about what you've heard today? Do stories play a part in your teaching? Think of an example when you've used the power of stories. Should we be using stories more in education? And how can we use stories more in the classroom? Finally, the power of storytelling is exactly this: to bridge the gaps where everything else has crumbled. Diolch yn fawr I chi am wrando. Thank you very much for listening to me. And hopefully you've had some ideas out of that, and you'll be developing storytelling within your curriculum in your schools. Diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Diolch.